Welcome to my presentation of Java 2D arrays. So what are 2D arrays? 2D arrays are basically when an array contains arrays with elements inside of it, or an array of arrays. Also, 2D arrays can be represented as a table or board with a row and column. 2D arrays are row major, meaning that it is based on the order of the row rather than the column, as seen in the two pictures here. So there are two steps when declaring a 2D array. Both of these steps can be done at the same time. The first step is declaring the name and the type of the array in the form array type square bracket square bracket square bracket square bracket array name. There are 5 main types of 2D arrays: strings, integers, floats, doubles, or booleans. The second step is to declare the contents of the array, and there are 2 options. The first option is to declare the size of the array, which can be done by array name equals new array type square bracket the number of rows inside the 2D array square bracket the number of columns inside the 2D array square bracket. Note that both the number of rows and number of columns in this case is not inclusive of 0. You could also define the elements of the array directly by treating all the rows represented by an array as an element inside an array. For example, array name equals curly bracket A, comma, space B, curly bracket, comma, space, curly bracket C, comma, space D, curly bracket in this example here. 2D arrays are indexed by 2 subscripts, the row and the column. Accessing an element requires knowing both indexes. Both indexes start from 0 or are inclusive of 0. Each subscript is enclosed by square brackets, such that the element at the position row column is equal to array square bracket row square bracket column square bracket. To get the value of that square, it can be in the form value equals array square bracket row square bracket column square bracket. Take note that the row number and column is inclusive of 0 in this case. To make this square equal to a value, it can be done through array square bracket row square bracket column square bracket equals the value. Some properties of 2D arrays are like normal arrays. 2D arrays have rows and columns starting from 0 or inclusive of 0. When attempting to access an element that does not exist inside the array, an exception of array index out of bounds occurs. All elements must be of the same type as the array type. For example, if there is an int 2D array, all elements inside the integer 2D array must also be an integer. Also, 2D arrays are made of reference types, meaning when a square of an array is set to equal another square of another array, when the second square changes, the first square changes as it refers to the second square. However, this only works if the first and second variable types are of the same referencing variable type. In this case, an element of a 2D array. Also, 2D arrays have a row length of array name dot length, which is not inclusive of 0, and has a column length at a row of array name square bracket row square bracket dot length, also not inclusive of 0. Some other information when declaring arrays. To fill an entire array with an element, we need to iterate through every single element to make each square equal to that element. Also, ragged arrays or arrays with different column lengths are possible and exist, and for loop iterations works just as well for them. However, ragged array must be declared by the element as it is not rectangular and cannot be declared by size. When defining the size, Java fills the array automatically with values depending on the type. For the string type, it fills with null or blank. For integers, it fills with a 0. For doubles, it fills with a 0.0. For boolean, it fills with a false. To iterate through every single element inside the 2D array, the most common method is to use a nested for loop. Of a for loop that goes through every single column in the row being placed inside the for loop that goes for every single row in the 2D array. There are two types of for loops, a for each loop and a standard for loop. The for each loop goes through every single array inside the array of arrays, and then through every single element inside that single array. In the example here, I represents the array forming the row and j represents the element itself. Note that the variable types I and j depend on the type of the 2D array, and the type of I is an array. In the standard for loop, it does the same thing but accesses the position of the element rather than accessing the element itself. The standard for loop checks for each possible row position and column position in the 2D array with array square bracket I square bracket j square bracket in this example represents the element, and I as the row number and j as the column number, inclusive of 0. Both of these for each loops can be used with their own advantages depending on the situation used. To print the 2D array, there are three methods to do this. The first is to print it as a table by iterating through every single element using a nested for loop. For each element that is on the same column, a space is added to separate them. For going onto a new line, a line is printed to separate rows. This prints the 2D array as a table where every element, row, and column is distinct and separate. The second method is to print all elements one by one, using a for loop iteration where printing each and every element on a new line. This is straightforward, but does not convey any information about the row or column of the element. The third method is to print the array as it is, or in square brackets. This is the most straightforward method and the easiest way to print it, through using the Java's array utility by converting the 2D array into a string using the array.deep2string method, which prints the 2D array in its square bracket form. However, it is very hard to interpret as all information is on one line. Thank you for watching my presentation.